Viewers, the day was scorching in Ouagadougou, inside a heavily guarded military base. Dozens of soldiers, officials, and foreign observers stood gathered in uneasy silence. Cameras were positioned everywhere, capturing every movement. The tension was so thick it felt like the entire compound was holding its breath. In the center of all this stood Captain Ibrahim Traoré, calm, steady, and focused, wearing his simple military uniform with the humility that had earned him the nation's respect. But the man standing opposite him carried a very different presence. Commander Mamadou Cabaret, once a soldier, now a warlord backed by foreign sponsors, entered the compound like he owned it. His men followed behind him with rifles displayed openly, an intentional show of force. Cabaret wore designer glasses, a polished vest, and the arrogance of someone who believed power came from bullets and money. This was supposed to be a peace meeting arranged by international mediators. But everyone knew the truth. This was a battle for authority. Not peace. Cabaret walked straight up to Traoré, refusing to sit, refusing to lower his voice. He positioned himself just inches away, making sure the cameras were watching. "So, you're the famous Ibrahim Traoré," he sneered loudly, "the young captain who thinks he could save Burkina Faso. The man who pushed out foreign forces. Tell me, do you really believe you can handle this country?" The room went silent. Mediators stared at the floor. Officials shifted nervously. Cabaret leaned closer. "You think you're Sankara reborn? You have no money, no weapons, no allies. And soon you'll fall just like every leader before you." He expected Traoré to explode, to shout, to prove him right, but that didn't happen. Traoré didn't even blink. He sat quietly, hands folded, eyes locked on Cabaret, with a calmness so powerful that the rebel commander himself began to tremble under that steady gaze. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15 seconds. The silence became heavier than any words. Traoré finally spoke, gently, firmly, without raising his voice. "Are you done?" 3 words, but they hit harder than any punch. Cabaret stepped back, suddenly unsure. His men stopped smirking. Something in that room had shifted, and everyone felt it. Traoré rose from his seat, not out of anger, but with the composure of a leader who knew exactly why he was there. "You didn't come to negotiate," he said quietly. "You came because your foreign sponsors sent you. They are afraid of what our people can become when we stand united." Cabaret opened his mouth to respond, but Traoré lifted one hand and the rebel commander froze. "You call me a boy," Traoré continued. "Maybe I am young, but I would rather be a young man fighting for his people than an old traitor selling his nation for dollars." Murmurs spread through the audience. Soldiers nodded, jaws tightening with pride. Traoré stepped closer, his voice rising with purpose. "You say I lack money? My people are richer than your foreign masters imagine. You say I lack weapons? Truth is my weapon. You say I lack respect? Look around." He gestured to the room. "Who do these people stand with? A man who serves them? Or a man who betrays them?" Cabaret's confidence shattered. The moment he hoped would humiliate Traoré had completely flipped, and he had no idea what was coming next. The confrontation had stripped Cabaret bare. Every mask he wore, every illusion of power he carried, all of it had cracked in front of the entire assembly. But men like him never retreat quietly. A wounded predator is the most dangerous. And Cabaret had just been wounded. His eyes burned with humiliation as he stepped closer. "You dare speak to me about loyalty?" he spat, his voice trembling. "You, the man who overthrew his own superior. You staged a coup, Ibrahim. You grabbed power. Don't act like some saint in front of these people." The accusation cut through the air like a blade. The mediator stiffened. Foreign observers exchanged uneasy glances. Even a few members of Traoré's delegation shifted uncomfortably. This was the weapon Cabaret had been saving. The one lie that enemies repeated again and again to stain Traoré's name. But Traoré didn't look shaken. He didn't argue. He didn't lash back. He simply breathed in, looked Cabaret in the eye, and said, "You're right." The entire room froze. "I did remove my commander," Traoré continued softly. "I did take control when the nation was collapsing." He stepped forward, his voice calm but carrying the weight of the country behind it. "Do you know why?" He didn't wait for an answer, because our villages were burning, and no one cared, because children were dying with empty stomachs, while politicians feasted at banquets, because foreign corporations were taking our gold, while our schools didn't even have chalk, because our soldiers were dying with broken rifles, while their generals bought new cars and villas. His voice deepened with conviction, but not anger. I acted because someone had to. Judge me if you want. History will judge me. God will judge me. But I will never regret choosing my people over my comfort. He turned, speaking now to everyone, the cameras, the soldiers, the world. You call me a hypocrite? Then I am a hypocrite who eats from the same plate as his soldiers, a hypocrite who repairs schools instead of expanding palaces, a hypocrite who refuses foreign bases, a hypocrite who chooses sovereignty over servitude. The room was silent, breathless. Hanging on every word, Traoré wasn't finished. Desperation twisted his face as he placed his hand on his pistol, not drawing it, but letting everyone see the threat. Strong words, he sneered. For someone protected by guards. But what happens when you're alone? What happens when your soldiers aren't here to hide behind? It was a threat, naked and unmistakable. Traoré's guards tensed instantly, hands drifting toward their weapons. Mediators leapt to their feet. Chaos was seconds away. But Traoré simply raised his hand. A calm signal, stand down, and they obeyed. Then Ibrahim Traoré stepped forward until he was inches from Traoré, their faces close, the tension electric. His voice lowered to a whisper that filled the entire room. I stopped fearing death a long time ago, Madou. If I die fighting for my people, then I die free. But you are already a prisoner of your greed, a prisoner of the men who control you, a prisoner of your own fear. Traoré's hand trembled on the pistol grip. The confidence in his eyes flickered, then vanished. He looked around for support, but found none. Only disgust, only disappointment, only judgment. Traoré straightened his posture and spoke with an authority that didn't require guns. You came here hoping to break me, but you have broken only yourself. Everyone sees you now for what you truly are, a puppet wearing borrowed courage. Traoré's men looked shaken, unsure whether to stand with him or walk away. And then Ibrahim Traoré did something so unexpected that the entire room gasped. He extended his hand, a gesture of peace, a gesture of moral strength, a gesture that disarmed the entire conflict. I forgive you, Traoré said calmly. The mediators froze. Officials stared in disbelief. Even Traoré's own guards stood stunned. Traoré looked at the offered hand like it was a burning coal. You... What? He whispered. I forgive you, Traoré repeated. Not because you are right, not because what you've done is acceptable, but because someone must break the chain of hate. Violence is what they want from us, the same people who profit from our division, but I refuse to play their game. Traoré's hand slipped off his pistol, not in surrender, but in defeat. And the entire room felt the shift. Traoré stepped even closer. Not with aggression, but with a quiet authority that filled the room. His voice softened, carrying a depth that reached beyond politics, beyond conflict, touching upon something human. Madou, you were once a son of this soil. You served under our flag with pride. You swore the same oath I did, to protect the innocent. He paused, letting the silence settle like dust after a storm. Somewhere along the path, you drifted away. But it is not too late. It is never too late to return to who you truly are. The words didn't strike like weapons. They landed like a prayer. The entire hall stood frozen. Traoré's eyes wavered. His jaw tightened. His muscles stiffened as if he was fighting a battle inside himself. Pride versus repentance, greed versus honor. The man he pretended to be versus the soldier he once was. After what felt like an eternity, his hand slowly slid away from his pistol. The air shifted. Traoré hesitated, then almost reluctantly extended his hand. Traoré grasped it. The handshake was brief, but in those few seconds, something extraordinary happened. The suffocating tension evaporated. A wave of relief spread across the room. First, one person clapped, then another. Within moments, the entire hall erupted into applause. Not victory applause, but applause for hope, for transformation, for the rare sight of compassion defeating violence. Traoré didn't let go immediately. He held Kaboré's hand firmly, looking directly into his eyes, not with triumph, but with sincerity. His voice dropped so that only Kaboré could hear. You can keep walking this path, serving outsiders, hurting your own people. Or you can stand with us, help rebuild what has been broken, help heal this land. The decision is yours, and yours alone. When Traoré finally released him, Kaboré's step back changed. The arrogance that once filled his posture was gone. The swagger had dissolved. What remained was a man confronting his own truth. Without a word, he turned and walked out. His men followed him, not with the pride of rebels, but with the heavy silence of men who had been shaken to their core. Officials rushed toward Traoré. Diplomats praised his restraint. Foreign observers called it one of the most impressive displays of leadership they had ever witnessed. But Traoré brushed off the praise. He simply returned to his chair with a calm expression, as if what he had done was nothing unusual, simply the right thing. Across Burkina Faso and across Africa, people understood the magnitude of what they had witnessed. They had seen a leader choose humanity over ego, mercy over revenge, unity over bloodshed. Within hours, clips of the confrontation spread across social media. News outlets across continents ran the story. But the most astonishing moment came 3 days later. Madou Kaboré, the man who had once threatened Traoré's life, released a public statement. He announced he was surrendering his arms. He disbanded his militia. He apologized to the people of Burkina Faso. Some doubted his sincerity. Others thought it was a political strategy. But those who had seen his eyes during that handshake knew better. They knew they had witnessed the power of forgiveness. Traoré didn't celebrate. He didn't boast. He simply continued his work, building schools, supporting farmers, training soldiers with dignity, strengthening Burkina Faso one day at a time. Because for him, leadership wasn't a moment. It was a lifelong commitment. And then something even more unexpected happened. In the weeks and months that followed, other rebel leaders began reaching out. Some asked for negotiations. Some surrendered their weapons. Some simply expressed a desire to end the cycle of destruction. Villages that had been at war for years began discussing reconciliation. Families torn apart by conflict started speaking again. Old wounds that once seemed permanent began to heal. Madou Kaboré, once feared as a rebel commander, became a symbol of transformation. He didn't seek political office. He didn't ask for power. Instead, he returned to his village and began working with young people, teaching them how easy it is to be manipulated, how conflict consumes lives, and how peace demands courage. He became living proof that even the hardest hearts can change. And across Burkina Faso, a quiet belief began to spread. If mercy could change a rebel, maybe mercy could change a nation. In the months that followed, Madou Kaboré became something no one expected. Not a hero, not a saint, but a man who chose a different road. He returned to villages where young boys were being lured by money, weapons, and false promises. He warned them about manipulation, about how foreign puppeteers exploited him to fuel wars that serve outsiders, not Africans. People didn't suddenly forget his past. Many never forgave him. And maybe that was fair. But others looked at him and realized something important. A person's worst mistake doesn't have to define their final chapter. For President Ibrahim Traoré, the confrontation didn't become legendary because he defeated an enemy. It became legendary because he refused to see that enemy as disposable. He didn't win through armies. He didn't win through intimidation. He won through something far more difficult: moral courage. Western journalists struggled to describe what happened. Their textbooks were full of old narratives. African leaders rule by fear. African struggles need international intervention. African conflicts are unsolvable without foreign guidance. But Traoré broke their template. He showed the world that strength isn't brutality, leadership isn't ego, revolution isn't becoming the monster you claim to fight. And across Burkina Faso, something extraordinary began to unfold. Young people who had grown tired of corrupt leaders, tired of empty promises, tired of watching their parents struggle, looked at Traoré and saw possibility. Not perfection, possibility. Teachers began using the story in classrooms. Parents shared it with their children. Imams and pastors referenced it in sermons about forgiveness and unity, because this wasn't just a political event, it had become a moral lesson. Across Africa, millions watched the video of Traoré's calm, his restraint, his refusal to respond to hatred with hatred. It became a spark in a generation tired of being told that African nations needed outsiders to fix their problems. Even foreign governments and corporations who had quietly hoped to destabilize Traoré's leadership suddenly found themselves facing an unexpected truth. Every attack on him only made him stronger. Every attempt to discredit him made people respect him more. Every insult thrown at him bounced off the shield of his character. Because how do you demonize a man who forgives the person threatening to kill him? How do you label him a warlord when he chooses dialogue over violence? How do you accuse him of corruption when he lives simply and works tirelessly for his people? The confrontation taught a lesson many had forgotten. True power is not controlling others. It is mastering yourself. True leadership is not measured by fear. It is measured by inspiration. True victory is not destroying your enemy. It is transforming the conflict. Years from now, historians writing about the transformation of Burkina Faso will mention the reforms, the rebuilding, the rise of local industries. But they will also write about this day. The day a young captain, threatened and provoked, chose mercy instead of revenge. The day a handshake carried more force than an army. The day forgiveness changed the direction of a nation. Traoré showed the world an African model of leadership rooted in Ubuntu. I am because we are. A belief in community, in dignity, in shared humanity. He reminded the world that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it speaks softly, extends a hand, and refuses to hate. And that is why this story refuses to fade. Why millions repeat it. Why it echoes across continents. Because in a world drowning in anger and division, Traoré's choice showed us who we could be. If we choose compassion instead of cruelty, if we choose hope instead of fear, if we choose to build instead of destroy. If this story touched you, don't let it stop here. Subscribe for more powerful stories of African leadership. Share this with someone who needs hope.